the B-17 Flying Fortress. Even the name sounds invincible. For many Americans, it's the most iconic bomber of World War II, a symbol of courage, resilience, and the power of teamwork. But behind the legend are real stories of real crews facing impossible odds in the skies over Europe. This is the story of one B-17 that refused to die, a battered, bullet-riddled bomber that became a legend not just for what it did, but for what it meant to the men who flew her and the war she helped to win. Let's set the stage. It's 1943, and the air war over Europe is reaching a fever pitch. The United States Army Air Forces have launched a massive daylight bombing campaign against Nazi Germany. The goal: destroy the factories, rail yards, and oil refineries that keep Hitler's war machine running. The weapon of choice is the B-17, a 4-engine heavy bomber designed to take punishment and keep flying. The B-17 was a marvel of American engineering. With a wingspan of 103 feet and a maximum bomb load of 8,000 pounds, it was built to fly high, fly far, and bring its crew home. Its nickname, Flying Fortress, came from its defensive firepower, up to 1350 caliber machine guns bristling from every angle. The idea was simple. If enemy fighters attacked, the B-17 would fight back with a wall of lead. But the reality of combat was anything but simple. Flying a B-17 over Europe meant facing flak, fighters, and the constant threat of death. Missions could last 8 hours or more, with crews enduring freezing temperatures, oxygen masks, and the deafening roar of engines and guns. The Luftwaffe was determined to stop the bombers, and every mission was a test of skill, courage, and luck. Our story begins at an airfield in England, where the men of the 8th Air Force are preparing for another mission deep into enemy territory. Among them is the crew of a B-17 known as All-American. She's not the newest or the fastest bomber in the group, but she's earned a reputation for reliability and for bringing her crew home no matter what. The crew of the All-American is a mix of veterans and rookies. There's the pilot, Captain Kendrick Bragg, a steady hand with nerves of steel. The co-pilot, Lieutenant Charles Pinky Pinkerton, is known for his quick thinking and dry sense of humor. The navigator, bombardier, and gunners are all young men, most barely out of high school, but already hardened by months of combat. On the morning of February 1st, 1943, the All-American and her crew are assigned to a mission over Tunis, Tunisia. The target, a key German supply depot. The briefing is tense. Intelligence reports heavy flak and aggressive enemy fighters. But the crew is ready. They've flown together before, and they trust each other with their lives. Takeoff is always a moment of anticipation. The engines roar to life, the bomber rumbles down the runway, and then she's airborne, climbing into the cold, gray sky. The formation assembles, dozens of B-17s flying in tight groups for mutual protection. The gunners check their weapons, the navigator plots the course, and the pilot keeps a steady hand on the controls. As the bombers cross the English Channel and head toward enemy territory, the tension builds. The radio crackles with updates. Flak ahead, fighters spotted, stay in formation. The crew knows what's coming. They've seen other bombers go down, watched parachutes blossom in the sky, heard the stories of crews who never came back. Over the target, the flak is intense. Black puffs of smoke fill the sky, and the bomber shudders as shrapnel rattles against the fuselage. The bombardier lines up the target, calls out, "Bombs away!" and the All-American releases her payload. The mission is only half over. The most dangerous part is still to come. As the formation turns for home, the enemy fighters appear. Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs dive out of the sun, guns blazing. The gunners on the All-American open fire, tracers streaking through the sky. The bomber rocks as bullets and cannon shells slam into her wings and tail. The crew works as one, pilot and co-pilot keeping the plane steady, gunners calling out targets, the navigator plotting the quickest route back to base. Then, disaster strikes. A German fighter makes a head-on pass, raking the All-American with cannon fire. The tail is nearly sheared off, the control cables are severed, and the bomber lurches violently. For a moment, it seems impossible that she can stay in the air. The crew braces for a crash, but somehow, the All-American keeps flying. The The pilot and co-pilot fight to keep control. The tail gunner, miraculously unhurt, reports that the tail is barely hanging on. The radio operator sends out a distress call, but the formation is already moving on. The crew is on their own, deep in enemy territory, in a bomber that by all rights should be falling out of the sky. What happens next is the stuff of legend. With the tail almost completely severed, the All-American's crew works together to stabilize the plane. The pilot uses engine power and careful control inputs to keep the bomber level. The gunners jettison anything they can to lighten the load. The navigator and bombardier take turns helping the co-pilot keep the tail from twisting off. Every man on board knows that one wrong move could mean disaster. For 2 agonizing hours, the All-American limps back toward England. The crew can see the tail flexing and twisting in the slipstream, held on by little more than a few metal spars and sheer luck. The radio operator keeps up a steady stream of updates, hoping for a miracle. The pilot and co-pilot never take their eyes off the instruments, never let go of the controls. Finally, the English coast comes into view. The crew cheers, but the danger isn't over. Landing a crippled bomber is a challenge even for the best pilots. The All-American's pilot lines up the runway, brings the bomber in as gently as possible, and somehow, against all odds, sets her down in one piece. The tail collapses on the runway, but the crew is safe. They climb out, shaken but alive, and the ground crews rush to see the damage. The All-American story quickly spreads through the 8th Air Force and beyond. Photos of the battered bomber, her tail nearly severed, become symbols of resilience and hope. The crew is celebrated as heroes, but they're quick to credit teamwork, training, and a little bit of luck. The legend of the All-American is just one of many stories of B-17s that refused to die. Throughout the war, crews told tales of bombers limping home with engines shot out, wings shredded, and fuselages riddled with holes. The Flying Fortress earned its name not just for its firepower, but for its ability to take punishment and keep flying. In the next section, we'll dive deeper into the design of the B-17, what made it so tough, how it was built, and why it became the backbone of America's strategic bombing campaign. We'll also hear more stories from the crews who flew her and see how the Flying Fortress became a legend in the skies over Europe. The B-17 Flying Fortress didn't earn its reputation for toughness by accident. Its legendary ability to take damage and bring its crew home was the result of years of design, engineering, and hard lessons learned in the early days of World War II. To understand why the B-17 became the backbone of America's strategic bombing campaign, and why so many of these bombers, like the All-American, survived against all odds, you have to look at how it was built and the philosophy behind its creation. The story of the B-17 begins in the 1930s, when the U.S. Army Air Corps issued a call for a new long-range bomber. Boeing answered with a prototype that was unlike anything the world had seen. A 4-engine, all-metal monoplane with a wingspan of over 100 feet and a range of more than 2,000 miles. The prototype, known as the Model 299, made its first flight in 1935 and immediately impressed military officials with its speed, range, and payload. But the real breakthrough was in its defensive armament. The B-17 was designed to defend itself. Early models had 5 machine guns, but as the war progressed and the threat from enemy fighters grew, the number of guns increased to as many as 13. These 50-caliber machine guns were mounted in turrets, waist positions, and the nose, giving the bomber a 360-degree field of fire. The idea was that a formation of B-17s could create a box of overlapping firepower, making it dangerous for enemy fighters to attack. The B-17's structure was another key to its survival. The airframe was built with multiple spars and bulkheads, creating a strong, redundant skeleton that could absorb tremendous punishment. The wings were designed to flex rather than break, and the control systems were duplicated so that if one set of cables was severed, another could take over. The fuel tanks were self-sealing, reducing the risk of fire, and the engines were mounted in such a way that the bomber could keep flying even if 1 or 2 were knocked out. Boeing's engineers also paid close attention to crew survivability. The cockpit was armored, and the crew positions were arranged to maximize communication and coordination. The bomb bay was centrally located, and the radio room, navigator station, and gunner positions were all designed for quick access in an emergency. Escape hatches and emergency exits were built into the fuselage, giving the crew a fighting chance if they had to bail out. But even the best design couldn't eliminate the dangers of combat. The B-17's missions were long, cold, and terrifying. Crews flew at altitudes of 20,000 feet or higher, where the temperature could drop to 40 degrees below zero. Oxygen masks were essential, and frostbite was a constant threat. The roar of the engines and the rattle of machine guns made communication difficult, and the constant vibration wore down both men and machines. Enemy fighters were a constant menace. The Luftwaffe's best pilots learned to attack from above or head-on, where the B-17's defensive fire was weakest. Flak, anti-aircraft artillery, filled the sky with deadly shrapnel, and a direct hit could tear a bomber apart. Many B-17s never made it home. The losses were staggering. In some missions, entire formations were wiped out, and the odds of surviving a full tour of 25 missions were slim. Yet, time and again, stories emerged of B-17s that refused to die. Bombers came back with wings shredded, tails nearly severed, engines shot out, and fuselages riddled with holes. Crews told of patching control cables with parachute cords, using fire extinguishers to put out engine fires, and landing with landing gear destroyed or missing. The Flying Fortress earned its name not just for its guns, but for its ability to absorb punishment and keep flying. One reason for this resilience was the way the B-17 was built. The use of multiple spars and bulkheads meant that damage was often localized. A shell might blow a hole in the wing, but the rest of the structure would hold. The engines were separated by firewalls, so a fire in one engine wouldn't spread to the others. The control systems were routed through different parts of the fuselage, so a single hit wouldn't knock out the entire plane. Another reason was the training and discipline of the crews. B-17 crews were among the best trained in the world. They drilled constantly on emergency procedures, practiced gunnery and formation flying, and learned to trust each other with their lives. When disaster struck, they didn't panic. They worked together, using every trick they knew to keep the bomber in the air. The culture of the 8th Air Force also played a role. Crews were encouraged to share their experiences, to learn from each other, and to develop new tactics and techniques. Innovations like the combat box formation, improved gunnery sights, and better communication systems all came from the crews themselves. The result was a force that was constantly adapting, constantly improving, and constantly finding ways to survive. The B-17's reputation for toughness became a source of pride and a powerful morale booster. Crews believed in their planes, and that belief gave them the confidence to face the dangers of combat. Stories of bombers like the All-American, the Memphis Belle, and the 909 became legends, inspiring new crews and reminding everyone that survival was possible, even in the face of overwhelming odds. But the B-17's toughness was only part of the story. The bomber's real strength was in its crews, the men who flew, fought, and sometimes died together. The bond between crew members was unbreakable, forged in the heat of battle and the shared struggle to survive. Pilots, co-pilots, navigators, bombardiers, gunners, and radio operators all depended on each other. When one man faltered, the others picked up the slack. When disaster struck, they worked as a team to bring the bomber home. The story of the B-17 that refused to die is, above all, a story of teamwork, courage, and the will to survive. It's a story that played out again and again in the skies over Europe as crews faced the worst the enemy could throw at them and still found a way to make it back. In the next section, we'll follow the All-American and her crew on their most harrowing mission. We'll see how they faced disaster in the air, how they worked together to keep their crippled bomber flying, and how their story became a symbol of hope and resilience for the entire 8th Air Force. February 1st, 1943. The crew of the B-17 All-American woke before dawn, nerves on edge. The mission briefing was tense. They would be flying deep into enemy territory, targeting a key German supply depot near Tunis, Tunisia. The route was long, the flak was expected to be heavy, and Luftwaffe fighters were sure to be waiting. But the men of the All-American were ready. They had flown together before, and they trusted each other with their lives. As the engines roared to life and the bomber rumbled down the runway, the crew settled into their routines. Captain Kendrick Bragg, the pilot, kept his eyes on the instruments and the horizon, Co-pilot Charles Pinky Pinkerton double-checked the controls. Navigator Harry Capel plotted the course, while Bombardier Ralph Burbridge reviewed the target details. The gunners, waist, tail, top turret, ball turret, and nose, checked their .50 caliber machine guns, loaded ammunition, and scanned the sky for threats. The formation assembled over the Mediterranean, dozens of B-17s flying in tight groups for mutual protection. The sun rose over the sea, glinting off the silver wings. The radio crackled with updates. Flak ahead, fighters spotted, stay in formation. The tension was palpable. Every man knew the risks. They'd seen other bombers go down, watched parachutes blossom in the sky, heard the stories of crews who never came back. As the bombers approached the target, the sky erupted in black puffs of flak. The All-American shuddered as shrapnel rattled against the fuselage. The crew braced themselves, each man focused on his job. The bombardier called out, "Bombs away!" and the plane lurched as the payload dropped. The mission was only half over. The most dangerous part was still to come. Turning for home, the formation was immediately attacked by a swarm of German fighters. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s dove out of the sun, guns blazing. The gunners on the All-American opened fire, tracers streaking through the sky. The bomber rocked as bullets and cannon shells slammed into her wings and tail. The crew worked as one, pilot and co-pilot keeping the plane steady, gunners calling out targets, the navigator plotting the quickest route back to base. Then, disaster struck. A German fighter made a head-on pass, raking the All-American with cannon fire. The tail was nearly sheared off, the control cables were severed, and the bomber lurched violently. For a moment, it seemed impossible that she could stay in the air. The tail gunner, miraculously unhurt, reported that the tail was barely hanging on. The radio operator sent out a distress call, but the formation was already moving on. The crew was on their own, deep in enemy territory, in a bomber that by all rights should be falling out of the sky. Inside the All-American, chaos reigned. The tail section was almost completely severed, held on by little more than a few metal spars and sheer luck. The control cables were damaged, making it nearly impossible to steer. The crew could see daylight through the gaping holes in the fuselage. The wind howled through the cabin, and the bomber shuddered with every gust. But the men of the All-American refused to give up. Captain Bragg and Pinky Pinkerton worked together to stabilize the plane, using engine power and careful control inputs to keep the bomber level. The gunners jettisoned anything they could to lighten the load: ammunition, equipment, even personal belongings. The navigator and bombardier took turns helping the co-pilot keep the tail from twisting off. Every man on board knew that one wrong move could mean disaster. For 2 agonizing hours, the All-American limped back toward friendly territory. The crew could see the tail flexing and twisting in the slipstream, held on by little more than hope and determination. The radio operator kept up a steady stream of updates, hoping for a miracle. The pilot and co-pilot never took their eyes off the instruments, never let go of the controls. As they neared the coast, the crew spotted Allied fighters circling overhead. The sight was a relief, but the danger wasn't over. Landing a crippled bomber was a challenge even for the best pilots. Captain Bragg lined up the runway, brought the bomber in as gently as possible, and somehow, against all odds, set her down in one piece. The tail collapsed on the runway, but the crew was safe. They climbed out, shaken but alive, and the ground crews rushed to see the damage. The All-American story quickly spread through the 8th Air Force and beyond. Photos of the battered bomber, her tail nearly severed, became symbols of resilience and hope. The crew was celebrated as heroes, but they were quick to credit teamwork, training, and a little bit of luck. The legend of the All-American is just one of many stories of B-17s that refused to die. Throughout the war, crews told tales of bombers limping home with engines shot out, wings shredded, and fuselages riddled with holes. The Flying Fortress earned its name not just for its firepower, but for its ability to take punishment and keep flying. But what was it like for the men inside the All-American during those long, terrifying hours? The answer is a testament to the power of teamwork and the human spirit. Each crew member had a job to do, and each relied on the others to do theirs. The pilot and co-pilot kept the plane steady, the navigator plotted the course, The gunners watched for threats, and the radio operator kept everyone connected. In the face of disaster, they didn't panic. They worked together, using every trick they knew to keep the bomber in the air. The experience left a lasting mark on the crew. Many would later say that those hours in the All-American were the most intense of their lives. They learned the true meaning of trust, courage, and resilience. They also learned that survival was never guaranteed, no matter how tough the plane or how skilled the crew. The All-American story became a legend, inspiring other crews and boosting morale throughout the 8th Air Force. It was a reminder that, even in the darkest moments, hope and determination could make the difference between life and death. In the next section, we'll explore more stories of B-17s that refused to die, bombers that came home against all odds, crews that survived the impossible, and the lessons they learned along the way. We'll also look at how these stories shaped the legacy of the Flying Fortress and the men who flew her. The All-American's miraculous return wasn't a one-time fluke. Throughout World War II, the B-17 Flying Fortress earned its reputation as the bomber that just wouldn't quit. Across the skies of Europe, crews told stories of battered, burning, and bullet-riddled B-17s that somehow made it home. These tales became the stuff of legend, boosting morale and giving hope to airmen facing the daily grind of combat. One of the most famous stories is that of the Memphis Belle. This B-17 and her crew became the first in the 8th Air Force to complete 25 missions over enemy territory and return home. The Memphis Belle was hit by flak, attacked by fighters, and came back with holes in her wings and fuselage more times than the crew could count. Yet, she always brought her men home. The story of the Memphis Belle was so inspiring that it became the subject of a wartime documentary and, decades later, a Hollywood film. Then there was WWII, a B-17 that survived one of the most incredible encounters of the war. On December 20th, 1943, after a bombing run over Bremen, Germany, WWII was severely damaged by flak and fighters. The tail gunner was killed, the oxygen system was destroyed, and the plane was barely controllable. As the crippled bomber limped home, it was intercepted by Franz Steigler, a Luftwaffe ace. Instead of finishing off the wounded bomber, Steigler, moved by the crew's courage, escorted WWII out of German airspace and let them escape. The story remained a secret for decades, until the American pilot Charlie Brown and Stigler met again after the war and became friends. Another legendary B-17 was 909. This bomber flew 140 combat missions without a single crew fatality, a record that seemed almost impossible given the odds. 909 returned from missions with engines shot out, landing gear destroyed, and more than 600 bullet and flak holes patched over her career. Her crews credited the plane's rugged construction and the skill of their ground crews for their survival. What made the B-17 so tough? Part of it was the design. Multiple spars and bulkheads, self-sealing fuel tanks, and redundant control systems. But just as important was the culture of the crews and the ground personnel who kept the bombers flying. Every mission was a team effort. Ground crews worked through the night to patch holes, replace engines, and get the planes ready for the next day's sortie. Pilots and gunners learned to trust their machines and each other, knowing that their survival depended on everyone doing their job. The stories of B-17s that refused to die became a source of pride and inspiration for the entire 8th Air Force. Crews swapped tales of miraculous escapes, shared tips on how to handle emergencies, and developed a fierce loyalty to their planes. Some crews even believed their bombers were lucky, attributing their survival to a particular plane's spirit or personality. But luck was only part of the equation. Training, discipline, and quick thinking were just as important. Crews drilled constantly on emergency procedures, how to put out engine fires, how to patch control cables, how to bail out if the worst happened. Many lives were saved by split-second decisions and the ability to stay calm under pressure. The B-17's reputation for toughness also had a psychological impact on the enemy. German fighter pilots knew that bringing down a flying fortress was no easy task. The bombers flew in tight formations, their guns creating a deadly crossfire. Even when a B-17 was badly damaged, it often kept flying, forcing enemy pilots to use up precious ammunition and risk their own lives for a kill. The stories of survival weren't just about the planes, they were about the men inside them. gunners who kept firing even as their positions were destroyed, pilots who landed crippled bombers on one engine or with no landing gear, crews who worked together to save wounded comrades, patch holes in flight, or keep a burning plane in the air long enough to reach friendly territory. One such story is that of the Liberty Belle. On a mission over Germany, the bomber was hit by flak that destroyed one engine and set another on fire. The crew managed to put out the fire, jettison the bombs, and limp back to England on two engines. The pilot, refusing to give up, coaxed the plane over the channel and made a belly landing at a British airfield. Every crew member survived. These stories became part of the lore of the 8th Air Force. They were told and retold in mess halls, on airfields, and in letters home. They gave hope to new crews, reminded veterans of their own close calls, and became a symbol of the resilience and determination that defined the air war over Europe. But not every story had a happy ending. For every B-17 that made it home, many others were lost. The casualty rates for bomber crews were among the highest of the war. The odds of surviving a full tour of 25 missions were slim, especially in the early years of the campaign. Crews faced the constant threat of flak, fighters, mechanical failure, and the unforgiving elements at high altitude. Yet even in the face of these odds, the men of the B-17s kept flying. They believed in their mission, in their planes, and in each other. The stories of bombers that refused to die became a rallying cry, a reminder that even when the odds were against them, survival was possible. The legacy of these stories lives on today. Restored B-17s fly at air shows, their engines roaring and their wings gleaming in the sun. Museums display the battered remains of bombers that made it home against all odds. Veterans and their families gather to remember the men who flew, fought, and sometimes died in the flying fortress. The B-17's reputation for toughness wasn't just a matter of luck or engineering. It was a testament to the spirit of the crews who flew her. Their courage, teamwork, and determination turned a machine into a legend. In the next section, we'll explore how the B-17's legacy shaped the future of aviation, the lessons learned from its design and use, and the enduring impact of the flying fortress on the men who flew her and the world they helped to save. The B-17 flying fortress didn't just survive the war, it changed it. The stories of bombers like the All-American, Memphis Belle, and 909 became more than just tales of luck and skill. They became the foundation for a new way of thinking about air power, technology, and the human spirit. In this section, we'll explore how the B-17's legacy shaped the future of aviation, the lessons learned from its design and use, and the lasting impact on the men who flew her. First, let's talk about the impact on aviation. The B-17 was a technological marvel for its time, but it was also a learning experience. The U.S. Army Air Forces and Boeing engineers learned hard lessons about what worked and what didn't when it came to building and operating heavy bombers. The B-17's rugged construction, redundant systems, and emphasis on crew survivability set new standards for military aircraft. Later bombers like the B-24 Liberator and the B-29 Superfortress built on these lessons, adding pressurized cabins, remote-controlled gun turrets, and even greater range and payload. The B-17 also changed the way air campaigns were fought. The concept of daylight precision bombing, sending waves of bombers deep into enemy territory to strike at factories, rail yards, and oil refineries, was controversial and costly. The losses were high, especially before the arrival of long-range fighter escorts like the P-51 Mustang. But the B-17's ability to take punishment and keep flying made these missions possible. The Flying Fortress became the backbone of the 8th Air Force's campaign against Nazi Germany, helping to cripple the enemy AS war machine and pave the way for the Allied invasion of Europe. The lessons learned from the B-17's successes and failures shaped post-war air strategy. The importance of crew training, formation flying, and mutual support became central to bomber doctrine. The need for reliable, easy-to-maintain aircraft influenced the design of future bombers and transports, and the value of morale, of believing in your plane and your mission, became a key part of Air Force culture. But the B-17's legacy isn't just about technology or tactics. It's about the men who flew her. For the crews, the Flying Fortress was more than just a machine. It was a home, a workplace, and sometimes a coffin. The bond between crew members was unbreakable, forged in the heat of battle and the shared struggle to survive. Pilots, co-pilots, navigators, bombardiers, gunners, and radio operators all depended on each other. When one man faltered, the others picked up the slack. When disaster struck, they worked as a team to bring the bomber home. The experience of flying in a B-17 left a lasting mark on those who survived. Many veterans spoke of the fear, the exhaustion, and the constant sense of danger. But they also remembered the camaraderie, the pride, and the moments of humor and hope that kept them going. For many, the friendships formed in the cramped, noisy, and dangerous world of the Flying Fortress lasted a lifetime. The B-17 also left its mark on the families and communities back home. The loss of a bomber crew was a tragedy that rippled through towns and cities across America. Letters, telegrams, and newspaper stories brought the war home in a way that few other events could. But the stories of survival, of bombers that made it back against all odds, became a source of hope and inspiration for families waiting for news. The legacy of the B-17 is also preserved in the memories of those who maintained and supported the bombers. Ground crews worked around the clock to patch holes, replace engines, and keep the planes flying. Their skill and dedication were as important as the courage of the crews in the air. The teamwork between air and ground was a key part of the Flying Fortress's success. After the war, many B-17s were scrapped, sold, or converted for civilian use. But a few survived, restored by museums and private collectors. Today you can see B-17s flying at air shows, their engines roaring and their wings gleaming in the sun. Veterans and their families gather to remember the men who flew, fought, and sometimes died in the Flying Fortress. The sight of a B-17 in flight is a living tribute to the courage and resilience of a generation. The B-17's legacy also lives on in popular culture. Movies like 12 O'Clock High, Memphis Belle, and Fortress have brought the stories of the Flying Fortress to new audiences. Books, documentaries, and video games keep the legend alive, inspiring new generations to learn about the men and machines that helped win the war. But perhaps the most important legacy of the B-17 is the lesson it teaches about the power of teamwork, resilience, and hope. The stories of bombers that refused to die are reminders that, even in the darkest moments, people can come together to achieve the impossible. The Flying Fortress was more than just a plane. It was a symbol of what can be accomplished when ordinary people work together, trust each other, and refuse to give up. As we look back on the story of the B-17 that refused to die, we are reminded that history is made not just by machines or battles, but by the choices, sacrifices, and courage of everyday people. The legacy of the Flying Fortress is a testament to the human spirit, a spirit that endures, even in the face of overwhelming odds. In the final section, we'll reflect on what the B-17 means today, how its story continues to inspire, what it teaches us about war and peace, and why remembering these stories matters more than ever. The B-17 Flying Fortress is more than just a machine from the past. Its story, especially the stories of bombers like the All-American, Memphis Belle, and 909, continues to inspire, teach, and move people today. In this final section, we'll reflect on what the B-17 means in the modern world, why its legacy endures, and what we can learn from the men who flew her and the missions that seemed impossible. First, the B-17 is a living symbol of resilience. The tales of bombers limping home with shredded wings, missing tails, or engines on fire are not just stories of luck or engineering, they're stories of human determination. The crews who kept their planes in the air, who patched holes with whatever they had, who refused to bail out even when the odds were against them, remind us that survival is often a matter of willpower and teamwork as much as technology. This spirit of resilience is something that resonates far beyond the world of aviation. In every field, in every challenge, there are moments when giving up seems easier than pressing on. The B-17 story is a reminder that sometimes the difference between failure and success is the refusal to quit. It's a lesson that has inspired not just military leaders, but teachers, doctors, athletes, and ordinary people facing their own battles. Second, the B-17 is a bridge to the past. For veterans and their families, the sight of a flying fortress in the sky is a powerful connection to a time when the world was at war and the outcome was far from certain. Air shows, museum displays, and restored bombers keep the memory alive, allowing new generations to see, hear, and even touch a piece of history. For many, these encounters are deeply emotional, an opportunity to honor loved ones, to remember sacrifices, and to reflect on the cost of freedom. The B-17 story also teaches us about the realities of war. The flying fortress was tough, but it was not invincible. The casualty rates for bomber crews were among the highest of the war. Every mission was a gamble, and every survivor carried memories of friends lost and dangers faced. The stories of the B-17 are not just tales of heroism, they are reminders of the price paid by those who serve and the importance of striving for peace. The legacy of the B-17 is also about innovation and adaptation. The lessons learned from the flying fortress shaped the design of future bombers, the tactics of air campaigns, and the culture of air forces around the world. The emphasis on crew training, mutual support, and the ability to adapt to changing threats became central to military doctrine. The B-17's story is a testament to the power of learning from experience, and to the idea that even the best technology must be matched by skill, courage, and flexibility. But perhaps the most enduring lesson of the B-17 is the value of memory. The stories of bombers that refused to die, of crews that brought their planes home against all odds, are part of our shared heritage. They remind us that history is not just a collection of dates and facts, but a tapestry of human experience, of choices made, risks taken, and lives changed. As we remember the B-17 and the men who flew her, we are also reminded of the importance of telling these stories. Every year, there are fewer veterans left to share their memories. Every year, the events of World War II slip a little further into the past. But as long as we remember, as long as we honor the courage and sacrifice of those who came before us, the legacy of the flying fortress will endure. The B-17 story is also a call to action. It challenges us to face our own challenges with the same spirit of resilience, teamwork, and hope. It reminds us that even when the odds seem impossible, there is always a way forward. And it inspires us to work together, to support each other, and to never give up on the things that matter most. As you finish this documentary, take a moment to think about what the B-17 means to you. Is it a symbol of courage, a lesson in teamwork, a reminder of the cost of war? Whatever it is, let it inspire you to face your own battles with the same determination and hope. If you've enjoyed this journey through the story of the B-17 that refused to die, please like, comment, and subscribe for more untold WWII stories and deep dives into the machines and people that shaped history. What do you think is the most important lesson from the Flying Fortress? Share your thoughts below. We love hearing your take. Thank you for joining us on this flight through history. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep remembering the real stories behind the legends.